After we chased the paddle downstream, we were nearly to our goal, the town of White Creek. We had lost the video camera mount, but took some still photos. Somewhere in this section is where Washington County and the town of White Creek begin, but there is really nothing here to mark it. When Rensselaer County was split off Albany County in 1791, the border of Washington County was moved south from the Owlkill to join Rensselaer County here. Originally, the line ran straight across the river and west, and Eagle Bridge would have been part of the town of Cambridge, Washington County. However, it was just a few farms back then, and there was no bridge. In 1815, White Creek was split off of Cambridge, and Eagle Bridge became part of the town of White Creek, Washington County. There was still no way to cross the river except downriver at Buskirk, and they evidently didn't like the situation. So in 1822, the counties agreed to move the line, and it was moved to run down along the center of the river from here to past Buskirk, where it rejoined the original line. Eagle Bridge became part of the town of Hoosick, Rensselaer County, where it has remained ever since. In the late 1840s, the railroads reached Eagle Bridge, and it soon became a bustling railroad community. In 1808, Anne McVicker Grant published a memoir in London of her growing up years in America. In it is an account of her trip out to Fort Oswego, Fort Ontario, with her parents in 1761, when she was 6 years old. Her father was Lieutenant Duncan McVicker, who later received a land grant in Shaftesbury and bought out 2 others, giving him land in White Creek also. She mentioned her trip down Wood Creek. This is out of the order of events of her trip west in her account, but the mistake is understandable given her age at the time and how much time had passed before she wrote. I have walked along Wood Creek near Rome, and it is a small stream similar to the White Creek, hard to get bateau down, but it was the main route west until the Erie Canal was built. The portage from the Mohawk at Rome went down Wood Creek to Lake Oneida, then up the Oswego River to Oswego, where if you wanted to go farther you could travel Lake Ontario. Her account gives a good picture of the difficulties of traveling by water.
Happily for me, we soon entered upon Wood Creek, the most desirable of all places for a traveller who loves to linger if such another traveller there be. This is a small river which winds irregularly through a deep and narrow valley of the most lavish fertility. The depth and richness of the soil here was evinced by the loftiness and the nature of the trees, which were hickory, butternut, chestnut and sycamores, of vast circumference as well as height. These became so top-heavy, and their roots were so often undermined by this insidious stream, that in every tempestuous night, some giants of the grove fell prostrate, and very frequently across the stream, where they lay in all their pomp of foliage, like a leafy bridge, unwithered, and formed an obstacle almost invincible to all navigation. The Indian lifted his slight canoe and carried it past the tree. But our deep-loaded bateau could not be so managed. Here my orthodoxy was shocked, and my anti-military prejudices revived by the swearing of the soldiers. But then again my veneration for my father was, if possible, increased by his lectures against swearing provoked by their transgression. Nothing remained for our heroes but to attack these sylvan giants axe in hand and make way through their divided bodies. The assault upon fallen greatness was unanimous and unmerciful, but the resistance was tough and the process tedious. So much so that we were 3 days proceeding 14 miles, having at every 2 hours' end at least a new tree to cut through.
So, did the early settlers really come up the Hoosick by boat? Undoubtedly, though they soon cut portage roads around the really difficult places, then began connecting those roads together to avoid the river entirely. But I have major doubts that in the mid-1740s there was one complete road that ran from Stillwater to North Adams, much less 2. The 1754 map shows roads in places, but none in others. There is little of historical significance in this particular stretch of water, until the river turns back to the right and descends to the mouth of the Owlkill through Class 2 rapids. To the northeast is the intersection of State Routes 22 and 67, and the former home of Grandma Moses. Will Moses has a gallery there now. In the early days there was a Mohican village in roughly the same area along the Owlkill. Rounding the corner, the railroad bridge becomes visible. The Rutland and Washington Railroad was chartered in Vermont in 1847. They began building west from Rutland, then in 1850 joined into and leased the Troy and Rutland Railroad line east of Salem. Then when the Troy and Rutland was completed west of Eagle Bridge, they leased the whole line from Rutland to Eagle Bridge. Due to the Panic of 1857, they ran into financial trouble, and financier Jay Gould bought up their bonds at 10 cents on the dollar, giving him control of the line. This was the first railroad he owned. He had run his father-in-law's railroad for a few years, and he actually ran it personally, acting as superintendent. This is where he learned railroading, and while his business ethics were very questionable, he really seemed to love railroads. Gould, through a series of purchases, mergers, and consolidations, gained complete ownership of the railroad by 1867, and it was then leased to the Rensselaer in Saratoga, managed and controlled by Gould in 1867, and merged into it in 1868. In 1871, it was leased by the Delaware and Hudson Canal Company and merged into the Delaware and Hudson Railroad in 1945. Around 1900, the Greenwich and Johnsonville, which once ran along Washington County Route 74, was bought up by Delaware and Hudson, which ran a new branch east along Route 29 to Greenwich Junction, just south of Salem, where it joins the former Troy and Washington track, and they tore up the old route to Johnsonville. The former Rutland and Washington track to Rutland also has been removed north of Salem. After the 1980 closing of the paper mill in Thompson, the D&H sold the remaining rail line to Ron Krause's Mohawk Transportation Company. Passenger service was run for a few years south from Salem, but ended in 2003. In 2008, the road was bought up by William Tabor, who was the present owner. It merges with the D&H at Eagle Bridge, which has rights on the Pan Am, the former Boston and Maine tracks. There. North of Salem, the tracks are gone, and west of Greenwich, they are abandoned. In their day, the railroads turned Eagle Bridge from a sleepy collection of a few farms into both a railroad junction and a local industrial center. They also enabled farmers to move from the collapsing wool and sheep business into dairy farming, by enabling them to move milk quickly to the cities, and in the other direction delivered coal to the area for heating and steam power just as the wood supply began to run out. Proceeding on downriver after passing under the railroad bridge, which we did by walking along the bank, letting the canoe find its own way through the rapids on the end of a rope, we come to the mouth of the Owlkill. This stream flows south through Cambridge from Lake Lauderdale in the town of Jackson, and there's the Hoosick here. The Owlkill was harnessed for water power early on. There were at various times one or two mills in Cambridge, another off-Senate Road and two near the mouth, and undoubtedly others. My grandson and I canoed upriver from the boat launch about 7 years ago and researched the herd mill for a written article. I hadn't started doing videos back then. I incorporated some of that research into this video account, but have since found out that there were also quite a few other mills on the Owlkill over the years. The earliest map we have, the 1853 Pearsall-Smith map, shows 2 mills. The 1866 Beers map also shows 2, but the sawmill is further upstream. There were other mills further upstream that are not relevant to this video. Sawmills were vulnerable to flooding, and gristmills to fires and dust explosions as well. John King owned a gristmill in the Owlkill. It seems to have been a fairly large operation, and for a while the area was known as King's Mills rather than Eagle Bridge. John had the 2 cast iron eagles made for the first iron bridge built in 1899 and donated them. However, I think, though I haven't been able to find paperwork, that he sold his mill site to A.J. Hurd in 1878. The mill may have been destroyed by flood or fire, as Mr. Hurd had to build anew. The Fish sawmill. This mill and Alvin Fish's house are shown in both the 1853 and 1866 maps. The mill, however, is shown in 2 different locations. This could be either a map error or because the mill was washed away and rebuilt in another location. A description of it is in the 1890 will of Peter Valentine, who had bought it from Fish in 1880 and left it to A.J. Hurd and Hurd's daughters. The will was probated in 1897. A.J. was old and suffering from rheumatism, so it's doubtful he ever ran it. The country had also been pretty well logged off by then. Peter Valentine was married to Clara C. Ray. A.J. Hurd was married to Lydia Ray. Lydia may have been Clara's daughter, but there are some problems with the genealogy I won't get into in this video. Their connection was definitely the Ray family. Herd mill. The only mill I have found much information about is the Herd mill. It was upstream a little ways from the mouth and was built by A.J. Herd in 1878. Albert Josiah Herd was born in 1847. He grew up in Sandgate, Vermont. He married Lydia Ray in Cambridge in 1874, and they moved to Manchester, Vermont, and made gloves and mittens. In 1878, they moved to Eagle Bridge, where he reportedly built or rebuilt the feed mill himself. They had 2 children, Nellie and Jessie, and lived on the other Rensselaer County side of the Hoosick River. In 1904, he took a partner, Gardner Bentley. The Herd and Bentley mill is recorded that year as handling 15 boxcars of grain and 60 of feed yearly. It employed up to 15 men. A.J. also got into manufacturing red paint, colored with red slate brought down from up north by rail. A.J. died in 1915. Lydia Herd and Gardner Bentley both died in 1926. They are all buried together in Cambridge. It is the last recorded in 1922 in the Delaware and Hudson Freight Shippers Guide, being run by Bentley. It probably did not survive the Great Flood of 1927, when the Hoosick River, having a capacity of 12,300 second feet of flow, and a previous maximum of 16,700 second feet recorded in Eagle Bridge in 1915, reached 29,600 second feet, and the water came over the road at the end of the bridge. There is no record of the Owlkill, but undoubtedly it would have been at record highs. By that time, steam and electrical power were replacing water power, and it would not have been rebuilt. These mills would have employed a number of men and provided a lot of economic advantage to White Creek in the mid-1800s to early 1900s. After passing under the present-day bridge and turning around, you can see the entire bridge, which was built in 1933. In the early days there was no bridge here, but as before mentioned. The first bridge was an open bridge and was built sometime prior to 1826. It was broken by a herd of cattle rushing onto it. The following article is from the Mirror for May 29, 1909, published in Eagle Bridge. In the year 1827, 2 carpenters named Comstock and Sherwood from Johnsonville took the contract to build a covered bridge across the Hoosick. 2 Fellshaw boys, Joe and William, worked with them. Previous to this time, there had been an open bridge at this place, but it had been broken down by a drove of Ben Jocelyn's cattle rushing upon it. At this time, there were only 3 houses on the Rensselaer County side of the river, and the same number on the Washington County side. Carolyn Thayer, a schoolteacher, lived in a little house at the end of the bridge. She was naturally quite an artist, and one day while the Fellshaw boys were alone at work on the bridge, she showed them the picture of an eagle that she had just painted. They persuaded her to get up on the scaffold, which had not been removed from the Washington County end of the bridge, and paint an eagle up there. When the boss carpenters returned, they were delighted and said, "Now we'll have one on the other end and call it Eagle Bridge." The scaffold had been removed from that end, and as Miss Thayer said she couldn't stand on a ladder and paint it, they built another scaffold for her, and she painted the eagle on the Rensselaer County side. Since then it has been called the Eagle Bridge. So the bridge was named the Eagle Bridge in 1827, but the community was known as King's Mills, because John King owned a large mill on the Owlkill, probably where a herd would later build. But between 1827 and 1860, the name Eagle Bridge gradually became the name of the community. At the time the covered bridge was built, there were only 6 houses there, 3 on each end of the bridge. It would be about 20 more years before the railroad arrived. During that time, and especially after the railroads arrived, the area grew considerably in population. The covered bridge was replaced in 1899 by a cast-iron bridge very similar in appearance to the present-day steel one that it was replaced with in 1933. The original painted eagles were replaced with cast-iron ones supplied by John King. These disappeared with the old bridge in 1933, but were found and refurbished and mounted on the new bridge at a dedication ceremony in 1936. A number of small businesses existed on the White Creek end of the bridge when I was young. There was a store which I forget the name of, a garage which was Cohn's, and up the hill Dunham's roadside stand, which had a number of exotic animals in cages that were fascinating as a kid. They sold lobsters at one time, and the aerator broke down. My dad was called on to fix it, so I spent most of the day there while my mom aerated them by hand. It was their anniversary, and they had planned a big evening out. Mom never let him forget that. East of Dunham's was Moses' vegetable stand, which is still there, Eagle Bridge Machine Shop, and a couple of others. All the ones near the bridge are gone now. The last business on this section of the river was the Marshall Carriage Works, a short distance downriver on River Road, just before where Center Road joins it. Richard R. Marshall was born in Cheltenham, Gloucester, England in August of 1836. He immigrated to the U.S. through New York City in 1855 and worked briefly in carriage works there and in New Haven, Connecticut, before moving to Hoosick Falls, where he met his wife to be, Julia Kaminsky of Cambridge. They were married in 1857. Julia had been born in Navan, Meath, Ireland in September of 1836 and had moved with her parents to America in 1850. Richard opened a carriage works in North Bennington, Vermont, which failed after the Civil War broke out. He worked at various jobs until he and his wife settled in Eagle Bridge in February of 1867. His carriage works there prospered, and he rebuilt the structures on the property, naming it Rock Villa. His home was decorated with wood carvings, and much of the furniture was built by himself. One chamber suite alone contained over 7,000 separate pieces of wood. Unfortunately, sometime after their deaths, the place burned and all his artistry was lost. His carriage works employed up to 25 skilled workers and produced up to 500 vehicles a year. He also got into floriculture and produced flower seed for Rice Seed Company of Cambridge and many other seed companies. In addition to that, he also provided quantities of cut flowers to events. He and his wife had 6 boys and 6 girls, of which 7 survived to see their 50th anniversary in 1907. They also had several grandchildren. Julia died in 1915 or 16, Richard in the first week of July 1917. Where they are buried seems a mystery.